Welcome back to the Foundation in C# course. We are currently in Module 9. In this lesson, we're going to be getting the available rooms. So this is a method that we need to call that gets which rooms are available to book, or which room types. Okay? This is actually going to be one of the more tricky queries to write. So what I want you to do is give it a shot. Now, if you don't get it, that's okay. You'll see how I do it, and then that'll make your life a little easier for the next queries. But give it a shot. Give it your best effort to try and figure out this logic. So add a method that gets the available rooms. All right? And that's the room types. So add supporting classes and models as necessary. So room types, not just the room numbers. All right? So do we have a king size room available? Do we have the executive suite available? And so on. All right? All right, so pause the video right here and get that done. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've got that done, or at least you have given it your best effort at getting it done. Let's see how I would do it. All right, so we have our application here, and we're going to create a new class in the data folder. We're going to call this class SQL Data Layer. All right, something like that. Let's call it SQL Data. That seems a little simpler. So SQL Data, and the first thing we'll do is make this public. And then in here, we're going to create a method. Now the method is going to be get available rooms. So public, let's say void for now, get available room types. And I'll pass in no parameters and just create this, the curly braces. So this gives us a stub of what we need, meaning this gives us just the name of the method. We don't have the correct return type. We don't have the correct inputs yet, but this allows us to start thinking about those. So let's first think about, what do we need to get back? Well, we need the room types. All right. So the room types are title, description, and price. Those are the three values, plus of course ID. So let's create a model in our models and call it the room type model. And make it public. And we'll create 4 properties. ID, title, which is type string, description, and finally, this is decimal because it's money type, and it is price, I believe. Let me verify that. Yes, it is price, not cost, so it's price. All right, so there's our room type model, which means we can now return a list of room type model and do our control dot here for adding our using statement. Now we know that's what we're going to spit back, is these are the available room types. But how do we know what to base that on? Well, we have a date, time, start date, and a date, time, end date. All right. Now the one point this does raise is, you know what? Our type over here is date time 2, but that would allow for a time as well. If we change it to just date, it will just accept the date portion. So I think I'm going to do that. Let's do just the date portion. And then what we'll do is we'll actually do a publish right away. So let's, oops, not that script. We want the publish. And let's publish this right away. Make sure it publishes. There's no problems with it. There shouldn't be because there's no data in it even. So I think that's going to make our life a little easier with our comparisons, because we have to compare to see if our date range clashes with the date range of a room or a booking. Okay? So we're going to pass in the start date and the end date. We still use date time inside of C#, but it will just take the date portion. All right. So what we need to do is we need to make a call to SQL to get which rooms are available. In order to do that, I have to know about the SQL data access. So I'm going to create a constructor, and I'm going to say I need an iSQL data access, control dot, and call this, let's just call it DB for database. Control dot to create and initialize my read-only private backing field. And now I can say underscore DB dot load data, and this is going to be of type room type model and dynamic. All right. And we pass in our SQL statement. What's our SQL statement? We don't have one yet, but I think it's going to be a store procedure. So let's pass in dbo.sp room type underscore get. Actually, let's make it room types. Whoops. Room types get available types. All right. That's our store procedure name, which we don't have yet, but this way we can at least put it in there and then create that store procedure. So parameters. Well, we have two parameters we have to pass in. So there's our new here. Let's put these on separate lines. So let's see if we can do a quick action refactor to wrap every argument. Wrap all arguments like so. I think that's good. We still need more arguments, but that'll get us started. And we're going to say the two arguments we need are start date, which we can pass in as start date. And then we're going to need end date equals end date. Now, where do these parameters come from? They will be in the stored procedure. So we're assuming we'll have a start date and end date value they pass into the stored procedure. Now, it depends on how you do your naming conventions, whether your parameters in your stored procedures have camel case, meaning they start with a lowercase like end date or start date does here, or whether you have Pascal case, where they start with a capital letter. I think we're going to stick with a C# style, which is the camel case. So instead of start date, it'll actually be lowercase s, which also allows us to do this. We don't have to pass in the name of the property because it will be assumed based upon this property's name. And we'll do the same thing here. All right, makes it a little bit cleaner as we're passing in our parameters. All right, so we passed in the available types. We passed in our parameters. Now what do we need? Well, we need a connection string name. Let's call it default for now. We'll come back to that in just a minute. And we also need, is this a store procedure? Why, yes, it is. All right, so there's our call. And now what we do is we can say return and that call. All right, and that's going to return the list of type room type model when we do this call. Now, this default here, that would be the name of the connection string, but I'm assuming that I'm going to have more than one database type, in which case I probably shouldn't call this default. I should probably call it based upon the database type. So SQL DB sounds about right, or SQL DB like that. Like that. All right, so that is the connection string name for our SQL database. Now, we don't have that connection string anywhere yet because we don't have a user interface yet to put it into. So we'll just wait on that, but we'll know that that is our connection string name. We could pass in the connection string name into this method, but I think that's not the greatest of ideas. We'll just have the connection string name right here. We may even do this. Let's do this. Private constant string, and we'll call it database, or let's call it the connection string. What do we call it here? The connection string name. So connection string name equals SQL DB, like so. And now we can use this constant everywhere we need that connection string name. That way, if we do need to change it later, we change it in one spot for all the different methods in this class. And there'll be a few of them, probably 4 or 5. So get available room types. Notice how easy it was to talk to the database. It's just this line. Now we do need to create this stored procedure, which we don't have yet. So let's copy the name. Let's go over to our DBO for our database. Right click on DBO and we're going to say add stored procedure. We're going to give it the name of SP room types underscore get available types. And we know we have to pass in 2 parameters, start date, and that's a date type, and end date, and that's also a date type. And then we'll have our begin, our end, and here we'll do our set no count on. If you're not familiar with stored procedures, this is something that you'll probably have to learn at some point using databases. A stored procedure is just really a set of SQL statements, one or more, that you can run together by just calling the name and passing in parameters if they have parameters. I have a whole course on SQL databases and SQL database development to learn how to be a good SQL database developer as a C# developer. Okay, knowing enough to work with a database intelligently and efficiently. Okay, so there is a course on that. I'm not going to go too deep into this. I'm going to get you just what you need to get this course done. So I need to have some type of SQL statement in here that gives me back a list of room types. Now I could do this. I could say select star from dbo.room types. Come on. Room types. And then I can expand this wildcard and say apply, and now there's the 4 values. I'm good to go, right? Well, that's only if there's not already a booking for one of those rooms or all that one of one type. Okay? Because if there's still one room available in that type, we're good to go. But it's when there's no rooms available of a given type we have a problem. Now this is a tricky SQL statement to write. So I'm going to break it down for you. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to go over to our SQL Server Object Explorer. We're going to start by adding a guest. So right click, we're going to do it manually. View data. And this is just for testing purposes. So Tim Corey, ID number 2. Okay, that's the record for Tim Corey. Now we can go to bookings. And we'll say view data. Now we know that we have room types. Let's go to view data and rooms. All right, so we have rooms of type 2, 3, and 4. There's only one room for room type of 4. That makes our life a little easy. Okay? And that room type is the executive suite. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a booking for the executive suite for a date range. So the room ID, that room ID is ID number 7. We're going to say the room ID of 7, the guest ID of 2, that's Tim Corey. The start date, let's put this date. It doesn't matter if it's in the future or the past. That's not a big deal for this query. So we're going to say 12/5/19. And the end date is 12/12/19. Now, if you're not US based, you may have just wondered if I create a booking for May 12th through December 12th. And the answer is no. In the US, the month comes first. So it's not day, month, year. It's month, day, year. All right? So it may be different for you. Make sure you know the order in which your dates go based upon your region. All right, so just note that that's the reason why this is December 5th, this is December 12th. Okay, that's our date range. Checked in is null, total cost, let's set the total cost at 500. It does not matter for this instance. Okay, now I moved down and it said, okay, checked in is false. The ID is 2, the room ID is 7, the guest ID is 2, and here's a start and end date. All right, so now what we're going to do is let's first start by getting a list Let's close out these other things. I'm going to leave that one open, and I'll leave this one open as well. Let's go to our SQL Server Object Explorer. I'm going to create a new query. So I'm going to create a new query here. It's here somewhere. New query. There we go. It's up here, a little button. Okay. This new query, I'm going to start by saying, you know what? I like to put extra spaces in here. That way I can move up and down my arrow keys without having to hit the end. So if I have something here at the end, and I try to highlight, I like to come above it and go below it. Okay? It's hard to go from below to above when it's the last line. It's also hard to go from above to below if it's the first line. So I like to have extra lines, and I put my code kind of in the middle. That way I can highlight it. When you're in a query window, whatever you highlight is what gets run. If you don't highlight anything, then everything gets run. So just note that, because what you can do is say select star from, let's just say dbo.rooms, which we'll need to do anyways. And we'll say where ID is greater than 3. Okay? If we run this by hitting run, it's going to say here is 4 values. But if I highlight just the select star from dbo.rooms and hit run, it gives me 6 values instead, because I'm just running this portion of the query. All right, so just note that's what's going on here. Now what we're going to do is actually write this query for real. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to get just the rooms. Okay, I'm going to give us an alias of R and say, let's get me all the rooms that are available, or there are. There we go. They're all the rooms. Okay, every room. Now let's link to their type. So inner join dbo dot room types. Call it T for room types. On t dot id equals r dot room type id. Okay. So what we're doing now is we're linking a second table in. We're going to link it based upon this room type column. We're going to match it up to the room type table on their ID. Now we can say r dot star, comma, t dot star. And this will give all the information about the room type as well. If we run this, we now have, okay, it's room type 2, which means king size bed with a window, and the price is 100. All right? And the same thing for the second one. We have repetition here. And that's okay because we have a repetition in type. Then we have 2 queen size and 1 executive. These are all the rooms that are available. All right? But I want to limit this to only rooms that are not booked. Notice this is all the rooms. I want to limit this now to only the rooms that are not booked. So how do I do that? Well, let's create a separate query down here to find out just the rooms that are booked. This is how complex queries get written. You don't write one big, long, complex query. You break it down into parts. So the part we're going to work on right now is just the rooms that are booked. All right? So select star from dbo.bookings. Call it B. All right? And what it's going to do, notice I'm going to highlight this and run just this. I have 1 booking. Now, we do have a start date and an end date. So let's put those values in. We're going to create variables for those. Declare for this person because they want to do from 1 to 3, 12:1 to 12:3. So that won't be a problem. If they were 12, let's say 12:12 to 12:13, that would also be fine because the person checking out is going to check out on 12:12. We could check in on 12:12 in the same room and stay through the 13th. Now, what if we said we're going to stay from 12:2 to 12:13? Well, that's not okay for this room because we're checking in on the 2nd, which is before the start date, not a problem, but we're checking out on the 13th, which is after the end date, which means this is in the middle. Well, we can't stop staying in the room for these dates and then come back and be there again. So we can't book this for this room. So if the dates are outside, so if the start date is before, if this variable is before the start date and this end date variable is after the end date, that means that we've overlapped and we can't do that. So let's write that where statement. So where start date is less than b dot start date and the end date is greater than b dot end date. Okay, so if you're outside, then don't list this or just list this room. Okay, so we're finding, oops, I've got to highlight the declaration as well. So this says, oh, yep, that room, which means that this room is unavailable. All right, so we're going to find all the unavailable rooms and then kind of flip-flop that and say, okay, if these are unavailable, what's left? All right, so this tells us that we're unavailable, but what if it was, notice the start date is 12:05, the end date is 12:12. What if we said, we actually only want to stay till 12:08? Well, now, yes, the start date is before the start date, but the end date is before the end date here. What happens? Well, it's going to say, whoops, it's going to say, you're fine, which isn't right. So let's add some more criteria here. Let's wrap this in parens. I'm going to say on the next line, I'm going to tab in one and say or. All right, and let's handle this case. So what if b dot start date is less than or equal to the start date? Nope, that won't do. This is going to find that that booking is unavailable. Cool. Well, what if we said, okay, so the end date here is 12:12 and the start date is 12:05. What if we said 12:11 to 12:15? Well, now the end date is not between the start and end date. Therefore, it's not going to find that room. But if you notice, let's just highlight just this. The start date is 11:11. Well, 11:11 is before the person checks out. Therefore, we have to add another OR statement here. This time for the start date. B dot start date is less than or equal to start date. And start date is less than B dot end date. Okay, so is the start date between these two dates? That's the third criteria. So we have if this date range is outside, so it covers this whole range here, that's one match. Or if the end date is inside this range, or if the start date is inside this range. So now if we run this, it again finds our record. But if I were to change this to say 14, actually 12, because 12 they're checking out. So let's just try just the edge case of 12. So if you're going to check out on the 12th, we can check in on the 12th as well. Let's make sure that works. It does. That room is available. But if I were don't show it. That's our flip. From rooms that are booked, we're going to say everything but those. Now, if we run this, notice we have 5 records. We don't have the 301 room because it's booked. But if we said 14 here to change our date range, which is available for that room, and run this, now we have all 6 rooms because that room is available. Okay? So now we know which rooms are available. However, we don't want all this duplicate data. All we want is that, let's change the date range back to the 10th. What we want to see is that you can book a king size room or 2 queen size room. Okay? That's all you can book. You can't book an executive suite for this date range. That's what you want to see. So how do we pare this down? Well, that's where we have a grouping statement. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to group by the ID of T. All right? So we're going to not even show anything from the rooms. Just say T dot star. So you run this now, we get just these records right here. So we get just the 5 records, and we have this one repeated 3 times, this one repeated twice. We don't want repetition. So we can say group by T.ID. Now, what that's going to do, if we run this again, it's going to say, hey, you got a problem because not everything is either an aggregate function or in the group by clause. That's because you have to have everything in the group by. Well, let's right click here and say, oh, I can't. Nice. I think because I've got an error in here, not positive. Or it's because it's a SQL query. not inside of my code. So I'm going to say, I'm going to do it manually, t.id, t.title, t.description, and t.price. And then I'm going to copy these and paste them down here. So what this does is it says, give me every unique combination of ID, title, description, and price, which there's only are the parameters that have been passed in. Now I have a stored procedure I can call. So you're going to pass in these two variables. The set no count on, Bennett says don't return a separate entry that says how many rows have been affected. All right, so don't return that because you already have the rows. So why set a count as well, which is just extra data across the wire. But there's our statement, and it's going to return an ID, a title, a description, and a price, which just so happens to match our model. Where's our model? Right down here, room type model, ID, title, description, and price. Okay, so we can close this out. We can save our stored procedure. We can close it out. We don't save our SQL query. We don't need to worry about that, and we'll leave that sample data in. That's fine. And we're calling that store procedure, passing in the two parameters, and getting back the room type model. So we're all set there. So really the only thing we need to do is we need to publish our database so that we have that store procedure in the database. So once that's done, I'm going to show you under programmability, store procedures, there's our stored procedure. SP room types underscore get available types. And there we go. All right, so now we have our method get available room types. Now, this is probably the most complex method we have in this database or in this application. Of course, it is right now because we only have one method, but it will be the most complex data access method we have. So don't worry too much about the fact that this was complicated because it's going to get easier from here. Sometimes you have those complicated ones and it takes a little bit of work to get right. But if you use your SQL Server Management Studio or your query window in the SQL Server Object Explorer and kind of play around and try things with your queries until you get it right and you test different scenarios, then you'll have an easier time of things. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. The next lesson will be easier. We're going to work on booking a guest. All right, so come on back for that lesson.